G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. If you're like me and you looked at Melbourne just going, what is going on down there and why has Brisbane pipped Melbourne now for the Australia's second highest median house price, you're kind of scratching your head going, something doesn't seem right. And look, we can call it the hangover effect from a few years of COVID. Yeah, that could be one of it. Could it be all the decisions they've made around taxes that are impacting property investors? That could certainly play into it as well. So I thought, why not get someone to come on and talk about it that's boots on the ground, close to the action. Christine Williams from Smarter Property Investing. Welcome onto the show. How you doing?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I mean, we had a chat a little while ago. I said, look, here's what I'm thinking. Are you happy to share? And you said, yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty well qualified because I've been here for some time and you've got, a good presence in around Melbourne. And we'll come to that in a second. But before we do, I just want to kind of, for people that maybe a little bit unfamiliar with yourself or your journey, in a nutshell, do you want to kind of download what I call the 3 Ps about yourself personally, about yourself professionally, and your property journey to date?
Okay, well, thank you. So personally, Christine Williams, married, wife, a mother, second wife, stepmother, step-grandmother, 7 grandchildren. So I'm 67. So I'm 67 next month.
Well done.
Professionally, I sort of became involved in the industry 15, 16 years ago. But before that, it was more of a personal journey, going through a divorce and coming up with a small settlement and great Australian dream, getting back into your own home. And along the way, I started to realise I was reinvesting. Didn't even know I was doing it, but that's what I was doing, having 2 children and private school fees and staying in the community where the girls wanted to stay. And that sort of brought around moving into property, buying land doubling in 18 months, making money, buying a small commercial building interstate that doubled in about 12 months and making money. And I thought, oh, wow, there's something in this.
Yeah.
And so really that journey started through really out of survival more than anything. And then, of course, you do get into your own home and then you keep on, once you get the passion, you just sort of can't get rid of it. So 30 years later, I'm still investing.
Well done.
My property portfolio was on the eastern seaboard. It was in Tasmania and it was in the Northern Territory. However, predominantly my portfolio is in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland now. Oh, no, the ACT. So, yeah, I've been around for a while, but I am a Melbourne born and bred girl. And, I've been around a while.
Excellent. Very nice. As you reflect
on...
on...
Oh, sorry, my purpose. Actually, I forgot that one. Sorry.
Yeah.
My purpose, I genuinely believe that education's the key, and I genuinely believe that if we teach our young and they can replicate it and duplicate it, this is a wealth creation tool that has stood the test of time. Property just continually goes up. Yes, there'll be a retraction, or yes, there'll be a stagnation, but it definitely goes up. So my purpose is actually to educate and teach, and it started off with my own kids, which all have properties, and of course then it went out to family members, and then it grew into a business. So the purpose is definitely creating financially fit families through property.
That's excellent. I mean, the hardest people to convince is sometimes family. So if you've done that, you've huge kudos to you, right? Family people are probably the last people to listen to you sometimes.
True. Yeah. I have got so many of my clients that are parents, and of course they love the process and they love the strategies behind it, and they go ahead and they do it themselves, and then they start trying to explain that to their adult children and they don't listen to them. So quite often I'm on a Zoom or I'm in a family's home talking to their adult children, and it's like the light bulb goes on. But all I'm saying is what their parents were trying to say. You are right, Aaron. Our children don't listen to us. But yeah, there was sort of a bit of a firm, yes, girls, you have to do this. You have to do this because, we went through a time where we didn't have a home. So let's set ourselves up. So, yeah.
There's something about having that hunger in the belly, right? When you've kind of, I wouldn't say lost it all, but when you have to start rebuilding phase, and there is a level of tenacity that comes when your back's against the wall, and it's like, I need to make this work, right? And you've kind of you've made some bold decisions. I mean, buying properties, they're increasing, and then you buy a commercial, that increases. There's an element of risk as well that comes with it, right? Especially when and it's calculated.
You say that. I think if I didn't realise what the risk was, maybe perhaps I wouldn't have done it. But it was full steam ahead.
Yeah.
It was full steam ahead.
I love it. Well done. Now, suddenly single and starting again. Is that a book that you've put out as well, or what's the take us through that
Actually,
philosophy?
it is actually, and it's, here I have,
Here we
copy there.
go. Yep.
It really came about going from emotional distress
Mm,
to what am I going to do now to survival to success. So there was actually a journey through it. And when I look back at the journey that I went through, during that journey, I don't know, when you become divorced or single, you seem to attract those people into your world.
mm,
Um, they're amazed at what I was achieving. And look, it didn't happen overnight. It took quite a while. I made mistakes along the way, which I teach my clients not to make those same mistakes now. And so I was probably encouraged to write my story. It took a bit for me to actually open up because there
mm,
was, an element of shame there, and I sort of didn't want to talk about the mistakes I made, or I didn't want to talk about the decisions that had been made for me that made me become suddenly single. So, but after I understood that there was a message in what I had to explain or write or put down, it became easier as I felt more confident in doing it. And I really didn't think anyone would want to know what I did or wanted to listen to my journey. But it turned out quite well. And I can just, one of the tips I have in that journey is probably the best thing I did was not do anything for 12 months. I secured housing through the rental market, but I didn't do anything for 12 months. And it was more about confirming and making sure that my children were okay in the community. I was still accepted in the community,
mm.
and, my career and so forth was there. So calming down, that was important in that 12 months. And then eventually I was making decisions, and I was making financial decisions. And as I said, mistakes along the way, but definitely big successes too. And really, that's one of the biggest tips that I have in my book, is that when you do come into a relationship that's broken up, don't make major decisions for at least 12 months. Funnily enough, I had a client this afternoon, a male, and unfortunately, over the weekend, the relationship broke up, and he was quite distraught. Um, he was distraught. I had his solicitor on the phone. It was actually quite a normal occurrence sometimes for about an hour and
Mm.
a half. And it was getting to hear what they had to say, listening to the emotion, listening to the decisions that they thought that they were going to make, and just explaining to them, I could say, well, I've been there, done that, so let's just put everything on hold. Let's not stress about anything. We can speak to the solicitor, we can put that on hold, we can take a break, and if we do nothing for the next 12 months, it's okay. Or if we do keep the land without building, that could be the best thing for you. So we really went through all of this. No, no, you have to do this. It was more about, these are the suggestions. And that was very early this morning at 9 o'clock. And then it was only just about an hour ago, um, the person called me back and he said, you've made sense of, I'll go ahead with the land. And okay. So it's more about not being forced or
Mm.
not being pushed into something. It's letting your emotions settle down, and then making very viable and palatable decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's a sense of
But there you go.
clarity. I mean, there's that great saying, you got to slow down to speed up, right? So there's a bit of clarity that comes when you can just give yourself time, and it's no doubt an adjustment period when you go from that type of relationship to then suddenly, what you're saying, suddenly single, and you go, maybe there's kids in the mix, and you're navigating a lot of emotions and a new way of living. You shouldn't be making those big bold decisions at that point. You just let it simmer a little bit. So yeah, really, really good sage advice. Thank you very much. Great. I'm going to set the scene a little bit, and let's have a chat about this. So this is all the information and research that I've done. I think we might even have a slide that comes up in a second, kind of showing some of the highlights and headlines that are painting the picture about what's going down in Victoria. So there's 53 new or increased labour taxes, almost half are property taxes, and the government is hitting up property investors to the tune of $4.7 billion over the next 4 years. CoreLogic,
Yes.
yep. CoreLogic shows
Yes.
Melbourne is no longer Melbourne's no longer the second most expensive city for houses. That now goes to Brisbane, where the median house price costs just shy of $940,000. PIPA, so the Property Investments Professionals of Australia, released data that Victoria was, by a long margin, ranked as the least attractive state for housing investors in the nation. Recently, there's changes to land tax, which is highly controversial, which dropped the land tax free threshold from $50,000 to $50,000 from $300K, and lifted the tax rate to $975 plus 0.1% of the value of an investor's properties worth more than $300K. And then there's the recent talks around energy changes that are coming around to make energy efficiencies around houses and better suited towards renters as well. So I guess your overlay, and we've got it all here. Thanks, Rachel, for putting together the slide, which is all the headlines that I've grabbed when you just do a quick search around investors in Victoria, which paints a bleak picture for what's going on. And then I've got data that shows investor loan falling as well to lows across the country. And when you look across other states, and the lending to investors in that state is higher. Bernie and I were recently down in Melbourne, and we just noted to ourselves that we just had a bleakness to it, had a drop in that frequency or that vibrancy that we've been used to seeing. And like I said, it might be a COVID hangover, for example, and no doubt the state's economy is in a state of flux. You're close to the action. Tell me, is what we're seeing here true and accurate? What's going on the ground, Christine?
The answer to the question is yes and no. The answer to the question is the individual and what their expectations are. So, as an investor, one of the things that I'm paramount with is we need to understand the numbers, the true numbers, and the true numbers are not the sale price that you've purchased at. It's not what you've purchased at. It's not what the rent comes in. Some people sort of look, I've spent $900,000 and I'm going to get $750 a week rent for it. I can top that up. They think it's just going to be topped up, but they're not thinking about the true numbers. And unfortunately, the true numbers let you know how much it's going to cost you to hold. And with today's interest rates, it's very rare that you will get a neutrally or positively geared property. Now, I'm talking residential property. I'm talking about a normal home or a normal townhome, some apartments. I am not talking about an NDIS property. I am not talking about an Airbnb, or I'm not talking about estates. They are completely different strategies. I'm just talking about normal residential property here. And when we think about the states and we think about everything that you've said, and everything that you said is true, it's definitely here. I started speaking about this about 18 months, 2 years ago, that taxes were coming in because it was, going through Parliament at that particular time. How were we going to get revenue in from post-COVID? What were we going to do? And unfortunately, we've got political parties out there that think that a mum and dad who's got an investment property must be really rich, so we'll increase taxes around an asset that is going to make them really, really rich, which doesn't actually happen. If you only have one investment property. So one of the things that I'm talking about is when we think about Victoria and we think about New South Wales and Queensland, I am not going to talk about South Australia or Western Australia or Tasmania or even the Territory in this instance. When we think about those three states, Victoria has the least amount of rental return. Victoria sits around 3%. Yes, there are some properties are getting more, some are getting less. But if we think about the average at 3%, that's what we're getting in a return. Melbourne has always had a consistent capital growth. And people in the past have looked at Melbourne as a great, even though it's only consistent, a great capital growth, even though they're not getting a great return on the 3% in rent, because they see that Melbourne is, going to be bigger than Sydney. We have got capacity to keep on building because we've got flat land, so we can, consistently still go to the north. We can still go to south, east. We can so far out in the west. That's what we can actually do. So it's always looked like an opportunity. But then when we think about New South Wales and Queensland, and we think about Sydney itself, their constraints is the Blue Mountains. They really can't go any further. And when they do that, it's sort of rural New South Wales. But they've always had a 3.5% to 5% rental return. It's just happened. And then Queensland, probably probably 20 years ago, look, it was sitting around the 3.5%, but it's jumped to 5.5%, in some instances 6.5%.
Yeah.
So when we think about if that's your return on investment in rent, it's got to be different in every state. And every state has different taxes. Every state has a different stamp duty, which is capital expense. Every state has a different expense under taxes, whether or not that be land tax, whether or not that be, your water rates. These are extra costs and taxes that are portioned to the property within the state. And Victoria has always been the highest taxed state when it comes to property in other industries as well. But when we're talking about property, it has always had the highest stamp duty and the highest land tax. Now, when you think about if we're at 3% return on investment and we've got the highest taxes, if a landlord is about, or a person is about to become a landlord and go into this, if they don't understand the bare minimums of what the extra expenses or the blind person's expenses, some people call it that, they're going to incur, all of a sudden the numbers that they've done is not going to work. And then, of course, we've had this increase in interest rates. Now, if we were still sitting around the 2%, as much as we do have these land taxes, and yes, there's a base of, 975, it wouldn't be as drastic. It wouldn't be as overwhelming. But we've gone from 2% to most property investors are sitting at 6.5% to 7% now. That's 5% interest on a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 loan that's been added together with. They couldn't put the rent up that much. Or in some cases, landlords have increased their rent, but you can only go so far. And then, of course, then they've got all these extra taxes that are coming in that are expenses that stamp duty you pay when you purchase, that's it. But these other expenses are coming in annually. So is Melbourne the right place to invest in? Well, it really depends on whether or not this is going to be an owner-occupier home or whether or not it's going to be an investment property and what the end goal is. So I'm a numbers girl, and if the numbers don't add up, to me, it's not going to be a viable investment because to gain capital growth, we need time. And if you have time for that capital growth, you've got to continually put money in to hold that property to get that capital growth. And trust me, I don't mind putting money in because it's, better than saving money. But it skews the numbers. And this is where I feel that there are a lot of people out there, media saying investors are selling left, right, and centre in Melbourne. Now, the only issue, as far as I'm concerned, there is if an investor is selling, an investor is buying, as long as I know the numbers, the rental market should stay the same. But if an investor is selling and it's an owner-occupier buying, we're now reducing our rental housing as well, which increases our housing crisis even more. So together with this post-COVID revenue land tax increase, together with all the other taxes that have snuck in, Victoria doesn't look like a palatable place to invest in. But as I said, an owner-occupier's emotion and wanting to purchase a property in Victoria is completely different to an investor. And I feel investors have better opportunities in this landscape to invest more wisely and accurately in other states. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't invest in Melbourne or Victoria. It's not to say that, because I've been on different platforms and I've talked about the cost to hold and what is the true cost to hold that property. And if you want capital growth, and if it is in your strategy together with superannuation, together with savings, together with shares, together perhaps with an inheritance, together with liquidating other assets or liquidating other property, if you want to stay in Victoria and you've got the time to you've got the funds to hold and you've got the time for the capital growth, eventually, there will be a turn of the wheel. Now, how long that will take, I don't know, because land tax, this new tax, we've got another 8 years to go. And so it's more about if you can afford to invest in Melbourne, if you want to afford to invest in Melbourne, if you've got the right numbers and the areas, because the southeast suburbs are completely different to the northern suburbs, completely different to the western suburbs, completely to the different demographics, to completely different to what the value of those properties are going to go up, which is no different to any other area in Australia. You may want to invest in in Victoria or Melbourne. But unless you know the true figures, how could you possibly make that decision? And then, of course, there's people out there that, you know, they're not comfortable investing outside their own city or
Mm.
their own regional areas because they don't know the other states and they don't know the other markets, and they feel that they're going to make a mistake because they can't drive past it. Well, those type of investors aren't the right. They're not the people that should be investing in property. They perhaps should be the people that should put their money into super or into shares or something like that, because people get this innate, we have to drive past, we have to see this
Yeah,
bricks and mortar, but they don't think about their super or shares, do they? They don't.
absolutely.
They don't do that. So it was a long answer. There's no right or wrong, but from a numbers perspective, if the numbers don't look right to me, it would be a no to me.
Yeah.
It would definitely be a no.
Yeah, you touched on another point I had here, which is stamp duty, which has been historically higher than other states where you buy the same property in a different state. Stamp duty is much less and the yields are better. And they're going, well, hang on. The flip side to this, and I'm not sure if you heard Bernard Salt speak recently, but they're saying within 10 years, Melbourne's population is going to overtake Sydney's, which makes it the most densely populated in Australia. And
Yes.
again, you're looking here going, but the price growth is lagging, but the population is soon to be booming. The counter argument could be this could be a little magic window to get in. I've got a great client. I know he tunes in every episode, and he's pro Melbourne. He's so proud. Shout out to Eddie, and he's like, this is the time to be buying, and he's so bullish, effectively, on this is the window. And other investors like, no, this is not the time to be buying in Melbourne. So it's quite a polarizing discussion to go, is Melbourne presenting an opportunity?
We think about areas, okay, and predominantly we've always thought, or most people think, that the cousins of the West are the poor cousins. And we know that if we go back 15 years, if you purchased a property, Sunshine, Footscray, you would have got it around the 250 to 350 mark. Those properties now are 1.5 million. And they're homes that need renovation. So where did that come from? Because that was the West, that was our poor cousins. So there's definitely an increase. There's definitely a stagnation, but there's definitely a part of a retraction. But the increase will always be there. And that's why I've said to you, Victoria and Melbourne have always incrementally had a capital growth. But then when we start to think about the demographics that are going into those areas, there's no reason why you can't buy in a blue chip suburb. If you can afford a blue chip suburb in Melbourne, it's going to consistently go up, and it's going to consistently perhaps have the right demographics for you. If you look at areas whereby, where it's not inner west, we're outer west, whereby the price point is a lot less for people to move into, you've got to think about the demographics. And we've got to think about, is that going to move? Because eventually, if you think about it, a 5, 10, or a 15-year cycle, the demographics generally move. So if we've got a suburb or an area that's got an unfortunate name for crime, burnouts, there's really lots of bad things happening there. With no matter what capital city you come from, there was always those areas. But if you think about a 5, 10, or 15-year generational move, the area actually rejuvenates itself, and the not desirables seem to move out, and the desirables seem to move in.
Mm.
So you would think about perhaps an undesirable suburb at the moment. Eventually that's going to change, and it will become a very desirable suburb. No different to Sydney, happened all over Sydney. No different to Brisbane, happened all over Brisbane. And of course it happens in our regional cities as well. There will always be a good side of the river or the bad side of the river, or the north or the south or the east or the west. So it's more about understanding what we believe that suburb is going to turn into and where we believe that growth is going. And whilst we think about the north, and I had some figures here, the north, the biggest master plan in the north at the moment is Cloverton. It's, way out past Craigieburn. Craigieburn used to be the end of the earth as far as Melbourne was concerned. Well, no, it's Craigieburn, Calcolo, we've got rural, we're in the city of Mitchell now. Wallen has just gone crazy, and all the way up to the border at Seymour. But if we're thinking about Cloverton, Cloverton is in between Craigieburn and the city of Mitchell. It's in the city of Hume. 30,000 blocks of land. this is going to be one of the biggest master planned estates that Victoria's got, apart from the southeastern suburbs. Now, you can get into Cloverton anywhere between 550, 600,000, or 4 to 2 and 2. But the demographics that are moving in there and the rent that you're getting, could be a good price point, and the rent is sort of okay. But really, we're going to be looking at something in that area for 10 or 15 years for it to really change its own style, for it to completely grow and get everything in it. That could be a good price point. Now, in 10 years' time, are those properties going to be worth $1 million, 1.2? Look, I'd suggest probably around the 900,000 on that in 10 years' time because of the growth. And then if we look at the west and we're going out to Deanside and we're going out to Melton and, Thornhill Park, once again, we're the west, but there's some good areas and there's some bad areas. And when we're thinking about that, that could be a 650 investment. Rent would be sitting around the $480, $500 a mark. And there'll be areas and pockets in those areas whereby the land itself is undulating, the estates, we put the Mirvacs in, we put the Stocklands in, you really get the good estates. It becomes a very family area, and of course it will have a good capital growth. But the estates that don't have the pleasure of having, the community areas, the parks and the gardens and all that, they get a bad rap, and they're the ones that aren't going up. Manor Lakes and Marboran, another 30,000 lot of land that's going to be, a huge estate master planned area. No different going down to the southeastern suburbs, whereby Pakenham used to be the end of the world there. Well, Pakenham's grown back through Officer and back to Dandenong, and then we're going across to Druin and Warrigal, up to Kuirup, Nanagoon, Lang Lang. These places are an hour and a half out of Melbourne, and they're doing exceptionally well because of the areas that's being created. In those areas, though, you can't get in under 750,000 for a 3, 2 and 2. The land size is less than 200 square metres. The home size is no more than 11 to 14 square metres. They're 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. The single car garages, from an investor's perspective, don't get a single car garage. You've got to have a double car garage. However, the blocks of land aren't big enough, or the blocks of land that are big enough are the ones that can get a double car garage, but it'll be a 3 and a 2-bedroom as well. Or you go up. So the lots have come down from, the 1,000 square metres to the 700 square metres to the 500 square metres. We were having trouble with the 350 square metres, but we've got those lots of lands in those estates under 200 square metres or around the 200 square metre mark that has a 10, 11 or 12 square house go on it. So the answer to the question is it the right time to invest in Melbourne? My answer to that is, if you can hold the property at today's interest rates, including all the new taxes and expenses, and you're comfortable with that hold cost and you're in it for the long term, why not? Okay. If you're not comfortable with the hold costs and, the taxes are going to increase over the next 8 years, because 975 isn't the end of this, it's going to continually to increase. If you're not happy with that, and if you're not happy with the current interest rate, we've been told we may get an increase, not a decrease. If you haven't done your true numbers with all the true expenses, with an increase in interest rates, together with a fair and reasonable rental return, together with your property management costs, together with insurances have gone up as well, together with the maintenance of the property, tax deductions and depreciation. If you're not comfortable with that, once you see that number, you walk away and you think about another state. But if you are comfortable with that number, there's no reason why you shouldn't invest in Melbourne, because yes, we are going to take over and we will be the largest city. Yeah. We're the city that's taking in the most amount of migration. So, we will need that housing. It's whether or not you're prepared to stay to the strategy, stick to the time frame, and be in it for at least 10 years.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate that. You just mentioned there about migration, and that's something that I definitely want to have a chat to you about, because it's a conversation that we've had in the past, which is the housing needs, migration. Are we scratching the surface in terms of what we need for demand there, and also separation? So there's another discussion that needs to have there. So just in a nutshell, for people that aren't familiar with this concept, can you take me through what we've spoken about in the past?
Okay, when I talk about my strategy, I talk about a PIES formula: population, infrastructure, employment, supply and demand. But I break down the population, and the
Yep.
population isn't as simple as how many people are born in Australia. And it's not as simple as how many migrants come into Australia. There are, four major parts of population, two of which I've just talked about. But the other two that people, unless they're involved in this or don't hadn't thought about it, the first one is separation. So we have a couple, may be married or not, but they have children. And generally, both parents want to emulate what they've had. So they try to, if they're moving out a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, they try to rent a second 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home so that their children feel safe and they can have their own bedrooms. Well, we have 53% divorce or relationship breakdown rate in Australia. So that means out of, if there were 5 million people that were in a relationship and that 5 million broke down, we need 10 million homes because we need a second housing. So the population has got a lot to do with separation and relationships breaking down, and that adds to the housing crisis as well. And then, of course, we have our young adults that, have been wanting to stay at home and they're saving and they've decided that they're old enough to leave home. And then they're leaving home, it used to be the 18 to 23-year-olds, but now it turns out it's the 25 to 32-year-olds. But in saying that, they then want to move out and they may not be in a relationship. It could be a single thing, or they house pool with housemates. But then all of a sudden we've got this other group of people that now want to move out of home and enjoy independence themselves. So together with population, natural attrition of age group and then wanting to move out, together with separation, together with downsizing, together with bringing family into your home. It could be, old elderly parents, or it could be um, older adults, or it could be that relationship's broken down in the family. We need all this extra housing. So the housing crisis, to me, is underestimated because it's not taking into consideration, separation at the bare minimum. We talk about migration and we talk about natural age increase, but we don't talk about separation, and it is a huge part of the housing crisis.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate you kind of shining a light on that because, yeah, I'll be open with you. I don't think we've ever spoken about separation, the impact that has on housing, and you've blown that wide open. So, Christine, I want to say thank you very much. In terms of strategy, so I guess the type of clients you work with and the strategies that you're articulating, what does that look like in terms of what they're trying to achieve and the results that you're getting?
Sort of funny when you start a business. Your business coach is what's your avatar,
Yeah.
who are you targeting. You've got to know your audience. And I just naturally assumed that I had a lot of people that were coming into my world that were separated or divorced,
Mm.
that perhaps that was going to be my avatar. Well, as it turns out, I ended up with two avatars. I did definitely end up with the separation type client, whether or not that be male or female. And, that was wonderful because, we could talk about our war stories and,
Mm.
they had someone to lean on. It was really great. But then I started to realize the second avatar that really started coming into my world was 45 plus. My girls had been going through secondary school, private school, and they were going out to that, and then they were going into university, and so therefore you find this other mix of people, and so it was sort of 45 to 50 plus couples where their children were getting close to the end of secondary school or entering secondary school, and they were thinking, "Gosh, I've got 15 years." And I'm going to retire in 15 years.
Mm.
And, we've just got our family home and we haven't paid it, and we've got private school fees, or we're putting their kids through school, and, we've got to buy our 18-year-old a car. So all of a sudden they started to think that they didn't have enough and they were looking at retirement. So that probably became my next avatar, together with separated adults. And with that, really the strategy ended up being the same. It didn't really matter at what point you were in. If you were separated, technically you're starting again, but you were starting again at a different point. Now, that may not have been with a settlement, but it would have been a different mindset, and you may have had children. And so, therefore, you're starting at a different level, which gives you a different mindset as to why you want property. When it came to the 45, 50 plus, they weren't starting again. However, they had started to think about retirement. So they started to think about the end goal. And so together, the strategy worked for both of them. It was more about understanding what they wanted to achieve now, what that now looked like in 5, 10, or 15, 20 years' time, and what that number had to be, and what we took into consideration,
Yeah.
together with, of course, there may be super there may be inheritances and so forth. And then, of course, I was working with a lot of self-employed who weren't putting away for super because,
Yeah.
as an owner of a business, they didn't have to do that.
Shocks
And
me.
they already got to oh gosh, we want to finish this in the next 15 years. What are we going to do? How are we going to catch up? What do we need to do now? And one of the biggest things that I feel that my clients understood was, even though that they were going to retire, if there was some sort of cash injection there, and that could have been super, or it could have been selling a business, or it could have been downsizing, you didn't have to have or own investment properties the day you retired. Because we know in Australia that, if doesn't matter whether you're 100, if you're working and earning money and you're earning more than 23,000 at the new cap, you pay tax. So the idea of getting people to understand that they didn't have to own it, the later they started, they didn't have to own investment properties. Your own home is very different, but they didn't have to own investment properties because there was still an idea that they could still claim tax deductions based on their investment properties. And you could end up with 3 to 5 investment properties, liquidating some of them to pay some of them off, or paying it down enough that, we still got our taxation deductions, but we had the cash flow coming in as well. So the strategy was more around what they needed to achieve in a particular time frame to get the number per annum that they wanted, and what did that look like, and then how many properties does that look like, not owning everything at retirement. And that's probably how I've worked around that for people who are starting later rather than sooner.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Christine. I really, really appreciate that. And like I said, we want to blow open what's going on down in Melbourne. I want to say thank you very much for sharing that. And yeah, if you're thinking about investing in Melbourne, I just want to put this out there to our listeners. Let us know. I want to know what you're thinking about, what's taking you down there. Maybe it is the population growth. Maybe it looks like a golden window when everyone's zigging you zag, for example. Let us know. But yeah, the listener comments that we get in, or the DMs that we get, are super, super helpful for conversations like this, where you think, hey, look, these are questions that I've got. I want to get these answered and by an expert in that field. So Christine, I want to say thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your insight, your wisdoms. We wish you all the very best. And if you found that episode helpful, let us know. But if you know someone that you want to share this episode with as well, it's even better, because that's that knock-on effect that we're getting for our listeners, kind of growing our own community as well. So thank you very much. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.